Hello viewers, welcome to Kids Auto and Truck Repair. Today we have a 2015 Hyundai Sonata with a 2.4 liter. The customer complaint on this vehicle is the check engine light remains on the dash while the engine is running. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in the vehicle and confirm the customer's complaint. After confirming the customer's complaint, then we're going to connect a scan tool to the vehicle to scan the engine computer so we can figure out what kind of trouble codes we have in the engine computer. So now let's go in the vehicle and confirm the customer's complaint. So right there, as you can hear, the engine is running and the check engine light remained on the dash. I'm going to turn off the engine. I'm going to turn the key on. I'm going to connect our scan tool to the vehicle. After I get my scan tool connected to the vehicle, I will bring you guys back up so we can scan the engine computer. I got the scan tool connected to the vehicle. Now I'm going to bring it up so we can scan the engine computer. So we're going to go to scanner. So right there, the scan tool has identified the vehicle, 2015 Hyundai Sonata with a 2.4 liter. So everything looks good. We're going to click OK. Let's do a code scan. Let's scan all the control units on the vehicle and see what we got. We're going to do a pre-scan. We have two trouble codes in the engine computer. Our first trouble code is P200600 and it says intake manifold runner control stack closed bank 1. And then the second code is P0011 A intake camshaft position timing over advanced or system performance bank 1. Now I'm very familiar with these trouble codes. This first trouble code over here is usually caused by stuck flaps in the intake manifold or a defective intake manifold flap electric motor. And then the second trouble code over here, this over here is usually caused by a defective variable valve timing solenoid or a sticking camshaft phaser. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down. Let's see what other trouble codes we have in the other control units. We have one code in the smart junction box, one in the weight classification control unit, and we have these two same codes again on the generic side of the tool. So the first one is P2006 intake manifold runner control stack closed bank 1, and then the second one is P0011 A camshaft position timing over advanced or system performance. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm already familiar with these trouble codes, guys. I don't have to look them up. I've done these several times, but in case you have a question, I'm going to look these up just for you guys. Okay, so we're going to look up P2006 and P0011. So let's go to our service information. So we're going to look up these codes. So we're going to look up P0011 first. Let's see what we got. So right here, P0011 camshaft position actuator. Let's click on it. Now I'm going to go to real fixes first. This over here is repair information that Mutual Pro Demand makes available to us. This is basically information that other mechanics that have fixed this issue have provided to Mutual Pro Demand, and then Mutual Pro Demand gathers this information and makes it available to us. So when other mechanics like me dealt with this P0011 code, this is what they did. They replaced the variable valve timing control solenoid to fix this issue. And like I said earlier, this code over here is really common on these Hyundai Sonatas, and the issue 95% of the time ends up being the timing solenoid, the VVT solenoid. Okay, actually we can read what this guy is saying over here. He's saying that he replaced the variable valve timing control solenoid, cleared the codes, performed the road test, and verified the vehicle operated properly. So again, like I said, this is caused by a defective, this code is usually caused by a defective VVT solenoid. We can also look at our top repairs. As you can see over here on this yellow graph, okay, the problem that fixed this code was replacing the variable valve timing solenoid. So now what we're going to do is, about this code, we're going to go under the hood. We're going to check the oil level first in the engine, and then we're going to check the wiring of the solenoid. If the wiring is good, then we're going to go ahead and replace the solenoid. So that should take care of the first code. Now the second code, let's look at the second code. The second code is P2006. So let's go back to our service info and look up that code, P2006. So code P2006. Okay, let's look it up and see what we got. So what does it say here? P2006 intake flap motor. Okay. So like I said earlier, it's usually the flap inside the intake that stick, or the motor itself that controls the flap on the intake gives up. So let's read the real fixes. This information is very good to have, guys. So let's read and see. Replaced engine intake manifold. That's good to know. So when this trouble code set, they ended up replacing the intake manifold to fix this code. I guess if the problem is the motor, I believe it's hard to get the motor, the electric motor by itself. You have to get the whole intake manifold. So let's read here. Let's see what it says. Replaced the intake manifold, cleared codes, performed the road test, and verified the vehicle operated properly. The check engine light did not illuminate, and no fault codes returned. Okay, I was reading right here. Okay, that's good. So this is good information to have. This already gives me direction to fix this problem. I mean, these two problems that we have. Let's go to top repairs. So let's look at this yellow graph. So the yellow graph is actually what fixed this code the most. Okay, so when this code was set, the fix for this was replacing the intake manifold. So right here, replace engine intake manifold. All right, so that's good. That's good to know. Now we need to go under the hood and do some tests. So we know this first trouble code is fixed by replacing the intake manifold, and then this second trouble code is fixed by replacing the VVT solenoid. Now, just because service information gives us this wonderful info doesn't mean we don't have to do our tests, okay? This over here are not silver bullets. It's good to have this information, but we have to go under the hood and do our tests. We have to test the wiring of these solenoids and make sure that they are getting power and ground. The solenoid on this vehicle, the VVT solenoids, received power and controlled ground from the engine computer. We have to make sure that that's there at the solenoid electrical connector. And then after that, we're going to have to test the electric motor of the intake flap. If the electric motor of the intake flap is receiving power and ground from the engine computer, then the issue will be the motor, okay? So now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna back out. Let's go to wiring diagram. Right now what I'm gonna do is we're gonna go under the hood and do some tests at the VVT solenoid and the intake manifold flap motor. So now let's go under the hood and do that. We're gonna remove our engine cover. This engine cover just pops off. We're gonna get it out of the way. So here is our intake flap motor. So this is the electric motor for the intake flap. So now what I'm gonna do is I am going to test the motor first. When we're done testing the motor, if this motor is bad, we're gonna have to replace the entire intake manifold, because Hyundai says that they do not sell the electric motor. You have to buy the whole intake manifold. So this is why when we looked at the real fixes on our service information, it recommended replacing the intake manifold to fix the P2006 trouble code. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I am going to back probe all these wires. The electrical connector of this flap motor has 5 wires. So 2 wires will be for the electric motor, and then the other 3 wires will be for the position sensor of the flaps. Okay, so I'm gonna get all these wires back probed, and then I'll bring you guys back up. I'm gonna remove this air duct over here. Let's remove this so we can have enough room around the intake manifold. We are back probing all the 5 wires at this electrical connector. So now let's see what we got on the lab scope. Okay, so we're gonna deep record this. Now I'm gonna go in the vehicle and turn the key on. Let's turn the key on first and see what we got. So I'm going to turn the key on. So the key is on in the vehicle. Let's look at our lab scope screen. Check out what we got. Let's bring our zoom window here. So all of this is control coming from the engine computer. Okay, so this over here tells me that the wiring of this motor is good. Okay, so we have about 5 volts on the blue trace, and then about 1 volt on the red trace. So 1.8 volt on the red trace, 1.6 on the yellow trace. So without even starting the engine, I can already tell that this flap motor is actually receiving control from the engine computer. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and start the engine. Let's see what kind of voltages we're gonna have over there. So the engine is running. Let's see what we got. Okay, so here's what we have with the engine running. So I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna go in the vehicle and turn off the engine. Let's analyze the data before we make the call. If we check the electric motor on the wiring diagram, so here is our intake flap motor. We have a red wire for the motor and the blue wire with a black tracer. So these 2 wires are the wires for the electric motor over here. Okay, and then these other wires are our position sensor wires. Okay, so now if we analyze what we have on the lab scope, if we actually, let's get a zoom window. Okay, so this over here is the control, okay, coming from the ECM to control the motor. Okay, so this over here tells me that the wiring is good. The flap motor is actually receiving control from the engine computer, because if we follow the wires at the flap motor, so those wires over there, they go to the engine computer right there. So according to this wiring diagram, let me highlight these wires over here. If we follow these wires, these two wires that come from the flap motor, if we follow them, so they go across this page. If you follow them, they go right here. Right here. What does it say? Motor positive and motor negative. Okay, so these two wires are coming from the engine computer. Okay, now let me see if I can turn on this motor, if I can bidirectionally control this motor with my scan tool. Let me turn on the key. Let's make sure the key is on. But what I'm about to do right now is just to double check, but we can already make a definitive call about this. Since we have a manifold runner code, this code over here, okay, so our problem is this motor. It's this guy. Perform test with key on, engine off. Okay, so we're gonna turn on this motor here with the scan tool, okay, and then we're gonna watch our lab scope and see what we're gonna have there. So let's go to start. Look at that. Stop. That's odd though. It looks like our motor is working, and we have our control here on the scope. We're going to try that again. I'm going to turn this on. Now this is making noise. The question is, are the flaps moving? I don't know, maybe the flaps are not moving in the intake. So let's stop this. So we definitely have something here. Let's pause this. Let me turn these. Okay. I don't know why this little square wave over here is not consistent. Let me turn this one on. Okay, so it looks like this over here, the blue trace is our 5-volt reference for the position sensor. The white trace is the sensor ground. The yellow trace is our sensor signal. Okay, so yeah, this is sticking. Okay, so when we turn on the electric motor, so we're basically toggling the motor. Okay, this should be consistent. These square waves should be consistent. I don't think, you see how one is taller than these ones? I don't believe this is normal. I don't think this is normal. This is a problem. And then the green trace and the red trace are actually our motor control. This motor here has a problem. Okay, this motor has a problem. I don't like what I see over here on the signal of the position sensor. I don't like this square wave over here. Okay, so we have good reference voltage on the blue trace. We have good ground. Our ground is not elevated. Okay, so this over here should be consistent. Okay, our motor control also looks good. So we have a intake manifold flap stack code. Our motor wiring is good. The problem is this motor. Okay, we're gonna have to replace this intake manifold to fix this code. So let me go back. So to fix this code over here, to fix this code, this one, we're gonna have to replace the intake manifold. So now let's test our VVT solenoid. We're gonna back probe the VVT solenoid wiring so we can test that as well. I'm gonna back probe the VVT solenoid wiring and then I'll bring you guys back up. This over here is the intake manifold. This is the intake camshaft. So right over here in front of the vehicle is the intake camshaft. Over there is the exhaust manifold, and this is the exhaust camshaft. And this over here is our intake VVT solenoid. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take 2 test leads from our lab scope and back probe these 2 wires over here. Okay, so we got the red trace and the green trace. All right, so we got the green trace and the red trace over here at the VVT solenoid of the intake camshaft. We can remove these test leads over here. We are done. We know the motor wiring is good, so this motor is bad. Okay, so let's look at our lab scope. So we're gonna turn off all these channels. We're gonna turn on our red trace and our green trace. Okay, we're gonna record this. I'm gonna go in the vehicle and start the engine. Let's see what we got. So as you can hear, the engine is running. Check this out. So we definitely have control at the solenoid. Okay, so the solenoid is being controlled. So the wiring of the solenoid is good. So the problem is the solenoid, guys. Look at what we have on the lab scope. So we can actually try to see if we can turn on this solenoid with our scan tool. Variable intake solenoid, okay. Let's see if we can turn it on. So I'm turning it on, nothing is happening. I mean, I'm looking at my lab scope screen as I'm doing this. I hope I can get the lab scope and the scan tool here in one shot. So watch this. I turn this on, off, on, off. Okay, so what this tells me is that the wiring is good because our solenoid is receiving the control. So the control is there. The solenoid is getting power and ground. Okay, the wiring is good. So the solenoid is the problem. All right, guys. So I'm gonna go in the vehicle and turn off the engine. So we are done, guys. We are done with our diagnosis. Okay, we are done. At this point, I feel comfortable replacing the solenoid and the intake manifold. We just need this motor, but since we can't get the motor by itself, we're gonna have to replace the intake manifold. Let me back out. I'm gonna clear these codes. Let me see if they're gonna come back right away. We got no codes present. Let me start the engine and see if those codes will come back. So the engine is running. Let's see what we got. So no codes are coming back. I mean, eventually they will come back. So here's what we have on the lab scope screen. Let's stop this. Okay, so we definitely have control on both traces here. Okay, so we're still connected to the VVT solenoid. All right, so I'm gonna turn off the engine. We are done with our diagnosis. Our intake flap motor is receiving control. The wiring is good, and our intake VVT solenoid is also receiving control from the engine computer. The wiring of the solenoid is good. Since we have a code for the solenoid and the flap motor, we're gonna have to replace the intake VVT solenoid and the intake manifold to fix these two codes. Now, the intake manifold on this vehicle is very expensive from Hyundai. It's about $600. I talked to the customer. The customer actually asked me to install a used intake manifold. So we're gonna get an intake manifold from the junkyard. We're gonna install it, and then we're gonna get a new VVT solenoid, and we're gonna install that also. And after that, this will be fixed. I'm gonna call the junkyard and get an entire intake manifold. It's gonna come with the electric motor, the electric motor, the intake flap motor, but it's gonna be used. I'm gonna get that, and then I'll bring you guys back up.